4,004 pages, 66 books, 40 different authors writing over 1,600 years, from shepherds to kings, from fishermen to doctors, from prisoners to generals. And when you put it all together, from the first verse of Genesis to the last line of Revelation, what appears is not a collection of loose stories. It is a single narrative, a single thread, a plan that begins before time exists and ends after time runs out. But how is it possible that dozens of men, separated by centuries, by languages, by entire continents, wrote, without coordinating, the same story? The answer lies in the next 60 minutes. And I warn you, when you see the entire thread at once, the Bible never looks the same again. In the beginning there was nothing. There was no darkness, because darkness needs a space to exist. There was no silence, because silence presupposes that a sound could be made. There was no void, because even a void is something. What existed before Genesis 1:1 is beyond the human brain's capacity to process. It was total absence, not of matter, but reality. And then God spoke. The Hebrew text uses the word bara, to create out of absolute nothingness, not to shape, not to rearrange, not to transform, to create. And the first thing he creates is not the earth, it is not the angels, it is not man, it is light. Before the sun, before the stars, before any light source existed in the universe, God creates light as a pure substance. Think of the absurdity of that. Light without a lamp, clarity without a visible origin. Time itself begins to run at that instant, because without light there is no day, and without day there is no sequence. What happens over the next 6 days is an explosion of engineering on a cosmic scale. God separates waters from waters. He makes dry land appear. He fills the oceans with life. He covers the earth's surface with vegetation. He hangs the sun, the moon, and the stars in the firmament. And the Hebrew word for hang is almost casual, as if fixing billions of stars was a minor detail of the project. And each stage ends with the same phrase, "And God saw that it was good." Each stage, except one. When God creates the human being, the phrase changes. It does not say, "And it was good." It says, "And it was very good." Man is the only element of creation that receives this extra adjective. And the detail that few realize is the way he is made. God does not speak man into existence as he did with the stars and the seas. He comes down. The text says that he forms man from the dust of the ground. The word yatsar is the same one used for a potter molding clay with his hands. And then he breathes into his nostrils, the breath of life, direct contact. The creator of the universe stoops down, touches the clay, and shares his own breath. The Garden of Eden was not a park. It was the headquarters of the human project. The text of Genesis 2 describes 4 rivers flowing out of it, the Tigris and the Euphrates among them, which places the likely region between southern rock and the Persian Gulf. The vegetation was entirely edible. There were no thorns, no poisonous weeds, no predation. The lion and the lamb shared the same space. Adam is given a single task, to cultivate and keep it, and a single prohibition: do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. One tree. In the entire garden, with all the abundance imaginable, only one restriction. Here appears something that changes everything else in the Bible. God does not prevent Adam from going near the tree. He does not build a wall. He does not place a guardian angel. The tree was there, accessible, within reach. Why? Because without the real possibility of disobeying, obedience means nothing. Forced love is not love. God wanted beings who chose to stay, not robots who had no other option. Eve is created because God looks at the man and says for the first time, "It is not good. It is not good for man to be alone." And notice, this happens within the perfect paradise. Adam had direct communion with God. He had a flawless garden. He had authority over every living creature. And yet something was missing. God anesthetizes Adam, removes a rib, and builds. The Hebrew uses bana, the same word for constructing a building, the woman, not from dust, like the man, from the living flesh of another human being, the first surgery, the first anesthesia, the first medical act in history. And everything was perfect until the serpent opened its mouth. What happens in Genesis 3 is the most catastrophic moment in human history. More than any war, any pandemic, any natural disaster, because everything that came after, every disease, every death, every suffering, has its roots in this single episode. The serpent does not attack, it does not threaten, it asks a question. Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? Look at the genius of the distortion. God did not forbid all the trees. He forbade one. But the serpent reframes the restriction as if it were a prison. And Eve, in responding, adds something that God never said, nor may we touch it. The exaggeration of the prohibition already shows that the seed of distrust was planted. Eve eats, Adam eats, and the text says something devastating in its simplicity. And the eyes of both of them were opened. They were not open to see beauty, they were open to see shame. The first human emotion after the fall is not anger, it is not fear, it is shame. They hide from God, the same God who molded their bodies with his own hands, and now they can no longer face him. If you understand that this moment changed literally everything, comment, everything changed. God does not destroy Adam and Eve. He expels them from the garden. But before that, he does something that goes unnoticed by almost every reader. Genesis 3:21. And the Lord God made tunics of skin and clothed them. Skins. For there to be skin, an animal had to die. In the paradise, a death did not exist. God kills a living being to cover the shame of man. It is the first sacrifice of the Bible. And it is God who does it. Keep this image, because it will reappear thousands of years later on a hill called Calvary, in a way that no one in that garden could have imagined. Adam and Eve are expelled. Cherubim with flaming swords block the way back. The door to Eden closes, and humanity begins its journey on the outside, in a world that now has thorns, sweat, pain, and death. The first son is born, Cain, then Abel. And the speed with which evil spreads is terrifying. We are in the second human generation, literally the first children born in history, and we already have a murder. Cain and Abel make offerings to God. Abel's is accepted, Cain's is not. The text does not explain exactly why, but Hebrews 11:4 gives the clue. Abel offered by faith. It was not about the content of the offering, it was about the heart of the one who offered it. Cain does not accept the correction. God personally warns him, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. God is literally giving Cain the chance to stop, to breathe, to choose differently. Cain ignores it. He takes his brother to the field and kills him. The first human blood shed soaks the earth, and God asks, "Where is Abel, your brother?" He knew the answer. The question was not for God. It was for Cain, a chance to confess. Cain responds with the coldest phrase in the Bible, "Am I my brother's keeper?" From Cain, humanity multiplies, and wickedness multiplies along with it. Genesis 4 records that Lamech, a descendant of Cain, boasts of having killed a man for wounding him. The violence that in Cain was an impulsive act, in Lamech has already become a point of pride. 5 generations. That was how long it took for murder to become entertainment. But a parallel lineage exists. Seth, Adam's third son, is born as a replacement for Abel, and the lineage of Seth produces something different. Enoch, the man who walked with God and was no more, because God took him. Enoch did not die. In a world where death reigned absolute, one man was simply removed from the earth. snatched away. No funeral, no tomb, no farewell. It is the first evidence that death was not the final word. Enoch fathers Methuselah, the oldest man in the Bible, 969 years, and Methuselah fathers Lamech, who fathers Noah. Keep these names, because while the lineage of Cain sank deeper and deeper into violence, the lineage of Seth kept alive a spark of faith that was going to culminate in something radical. Genesis 6 opens with a phrase that sounds like science fiction. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took for themselves wives of all whom they chose. Who are the sons of God? The theological debate has lasted millennia. But the Hebrew text uses Bene Elohim, the same expression that in Job refers to angelic beings. The result of this union is the Nephilim, beings described as men of renown, giants. The border between heaven and earth was violated, and God's reaction is the heaviest phrase in the entire Old Testament. The Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. The gravity of this is almost unbearable. The same God who looked at creation and said, "Very good now," feels regret. Not cold anger, regret, pain. Human wickedness had become so totalizing that Genesis 6:5 says that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time, not part of the thoughts. Every thought, not sometimes, all the time. God decides to restart, but in the midst of an entire condemned civilization, one man finds grace: Noah. The text says that he was righteous and blameless among the people of his time, and that he walked with God. And God gives him a task that by any human calculation is pure insanity: to build a ship 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high, in the middle of dry land, possibly hundreds of miles from the sea. Noah does not argue. He does not question. He does not ask for a sign. Genesis 6:22 is almost brutal in its simplicity. Noah did everything just as God commanded him, and this construction did not last weeks. Tradition indicates decades. Imagine the mockery. Imagine the neighbors. A 600-year-old man building a giant boat where there was no water. Noah's faith was not emotional. It was structural. He hammered nails every day in an obedience that defied all visible logic. The animals enter. 7 pairs of the clean, 1 pair of the rest. The door closes, and the text specifies, "The Lord shut him in." It was not Noah who locked it. It was God. Whoever was inside was saved. Whoever was outside was condemned. And at that moment, there was no more debate, no more chance, no more argument. Grace had a deadline, and it expired. The rain fell for 40 days and 40 nights. But the detail that it brings goes beyond rain. All the springs of the great deep burst forth. Destruction came from above and below simultaneously. Subterranean waters exploding through the earth's crust, while the sky collapsed in torrents. The water level rose until it covered the highest mountains by more than 20 feet. Every living thing that breathed on dry land perished. Every civilization, every building, every memory, erased. Noah and his family floated for 150 days before the waters began to recede. 5 months inside a wooden box, in the dark, with the weight of an entire world on their backs, and the faith that the same God who closed the door would, in the right time, open it. When the waters finally recede, and the ark rests on the mountains of Ararat, Noah comes out and does the first thing. He builds an altar and offers a sacrifice. In the empty world, before building a house, before planting, before any act of survival, he worships, and God responds with a covenant, the first formal covenant of the Bible, the rainbow. Never again will a flood destroy the entire earth. The sign remains in the sky, visible, permanent, as a reminder that total destruction is not God's final plan. But Noah was not perfect. Shortly after, he plants a vineyard, drinks, and gets drunk. The man who saved humanity falls into the same weakness that consumes any human being. And it is here that the Bible shows something that sets it apart from any other religious text. It does not hide the flaws of its heroes. Noah, the righteous, fell. Abraham, the father of faith, will lie. Moses, the deliverer, will kill a man. David, the king after God's own heart, will commit adultery and murder. The Bible does not present immaculate heroes. It presents real human beings whom God uses despite their flaws. If this impacted you, leave a like now, so this video reaches more people. After the flood, humanity restarts with Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. From them come all the nations of the earth. And in a few generations, the same arrogance that destroyed the ancient world reappears. Genesis 11. The Tower of Babel. All of humanity speaks a single language, and instead of spreading across the earth as God commanded, they concentrate on a plain in the land of Shinar and say, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves." The problem was not the engineering, it was the intention. Let us make a name for ourselves, not for God. It is the temptation of Eden reframed on an urban scale. The serpent said, "You will be like God." At Babel, humanity tries to reach heaven by its own effort. God comes down. And the irony of the text is intentional. The tower that supposedly reached heaven was so small that God had to come down to see it, and confuses the languages. Overnight, no one understands each other anymore. The groups disperse, nations form, and human unity fragments into 70 different peoples scattered across the face of the earth. Here begins the part of the story that changes everything. Because until now, God has dealt with all of humanity. He created everyone. He judged everyone. He saved Noah from within a condemned world. But from Genesis 12 on, the strategy changes. God will no longer work with everyone at the same time. He will choose one man, one family, one nation, and through that nation reach all the others. The man's name is Abram. He lives in Ur of the Chaldeans, current southern Iraq, one of the most advanced cities of the ancient world, with ziggurats, international trade, and a sophisticated culture. And God appears to this 75-year-old man, married to a sterile woman, and says, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you." Think of the madness of this proposal. Leave everything you know. Go to a place I haven't told you where it is yet. Trust that your sterile wife will produce a nation. And Abram goes, without a map, without a visible guarantee, without a deadline. Hebrews 11 says that he went out even though he did not know where he was going. This is the moment when the Bible defines what faith means for the rest of its pages. Acting based on God's word, when all visible evidence says it is impossible. But the journey of Abraham, God changes his name later from Abram to Abraham, father of multitudes, is not a straight line of victories. He lies about Sarah being his wife. Twice. He tries to solve God's promise on his own, having a son with the servant Hagar, Ishmael, whose descendants would become the Arab nations. And he waits 25 years between the promise and the fulfillment. 25 years. He was 75 when God promised. He was 100 when Isaac was finally born. Sarah was 90. The couple laughed when God confirmed the promise, and that is why the son is named Isaac, which in Hebrew means laughter. But the most brutal test was still to come. And what God asks of Abraham on Mount Moriah is so shocking that even today theologians debate its meaning, because in this request is hidden the shadow of something that would only happen 2,000 years later, on the same mountain, with another father and another son. Genesis 22. God says, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and sacrifice him there as a burnt offering." Every word is a scalpel. It doesn't just say your son, it says your only son. It doesn't just say your only son, it says whom you love. God makes sure that Abraham feels the full weight of what is asked before he obeys. Abraham wakes up early. He does not argue. He does not negotiate as he did for Sodom. He splits the wood, saddles the donkey, and walks for 3 days with his son by his side, 3 days knowing what he would have to do at the top of that mountain. Isaac carries the wood on his back. The father carries the fire and the knife. And on the way, the boy asks, "Father, the fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham's response is the most prophetic phrase in the Old Testament. God himself will provide the lamb. He binds Isaac, he raises the knife, and at the last second the angel of the Lord cries out from heaven, "Abraham, do not lay a hand on the boy." A ram appears caught by its horns in a thicket, the substitute. The animal dies in place of the son, and Abraham calls that place, "The Lord will provide." 2,000 years later, on that same mountain, Mount Moriah, where later Solomon would build the temple, in the same chain of hills where Golgotha is located, another father would hand over another son. Only this time, there would be no substitute ram. This time, the son was the lamb. If you believe that nothing in the Bible is a coincidence, comment, "God planned everything." Isaac fathers Jacob. And Jacob is perhaps the most complicated character in Genesis. He is born clutching the heel of his twin brother, Esau, and the name Jacob means exactly that. One who grasps the heel, or more directly, deceiver, and he lives up to the name. He deceives his brother to steal the birthright. He deceives his blind father to steal the blessing. He flees from Esau's fury and ends up at his uncle Laban's house, who deceives him back, making him work 14 years for 2 wives when the agreement was 7 for 1. But one night on the banks of the Jabokah, Jacob has the encounter that redefines his life. A mysterious being wrestles with him from dusk until dawn. Jacob does not let go. Even when the being dislocates his hip with a touch, which shows he could have defeated him at any moment, Jacob clings on and says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And the being changes his name from Jacob, deceiver, to Israel, one who struggles with God and overcomes. An entire nation will carry the name of a man who refused to let go of God. Jacob, now Israel, has 12 sons, and from these 12 sons are born the 12 tribes that will form the chosen people. But before this nation exists, it needs to pass through the fire, and the path to the fire begins with the youngest of the sons. A dreaming teenager named Joseph, sold as a slave by his own brothers on an ordinary afternoon, thrown into a dry pit while they ate lunch without remorse, and taken to Egypt by a caravan of merchants for 20 pieces of silver. What Joseph did not know, what no one in that family destroyed by jealousy could imagine, is that that pit was the first step of a ladder that would lead a slave to the second most powerful throne in the world, and that the famine that would come upon all the earth would push his own brothers to kneel before him without recognizing him. But to understand the exodus that freed an entire nation, one must first understand the slave who saved an empire. Joseph arrives in Egypt at 17 years old, covered in dust, chained among merchandise, not speaking the language, not knowing anyone. He is bought by Potiphar, captain of Pharaoh's guard. And the text repeats a phrase that is the key to Joseph's entire story. The Lord was with Joseph. He was not in the temple. He was not in the promised land. He was in the house of a pagan official, and God was with him there. Joseph prospers so much that Potiphar hands over the entire administration of the house into his hands, until Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him, day after day. And Joseph refuses with a phrase that reveals forged character. "How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" She falsely accuses him. Joseph is imprisoned, from the palace to the dungeon, and any normal person would look at this sequence, sold by his brothers, enslaved, falsely accused, imprisoned, and include that God abandoned him. But the text repeats, "The Lord was with Joseph and showed him kindness." In the pit, in Potiphar's house, in the prison, God's presence did not depend on the circumstance. And in the prison, Joseph interprets the dreams of two of Pharaoh's officials. The cupbearer is restored to his position, exactly as Joseph predicted. But he forgets Joseph for 2 whole years. 2 years, added to the years of slavery, added to the betrayal of his brothers. Joseph accumulates more than a decade of unjust suffering, without a single explanation from heaven, until Pharaoh dreams. 7 fat cows devoured by 7 thin cows, 7 full ears of grain swallowed by 7 withered ears. No wise man in Egypt can decipher it. And finally, the cupbearer remembers the Hebrew who interpreted his dream in prison. Joseph is taken out of the dungeon, shaved, dressed, and placed before the most powerful throne on earth. And he does not use the moment to promote himself. He says, "I cannot do it. God will give the answer." The interpretation, 7 years of absolute abundance followed by 7 years of famine, so severe it will erase all memory of plenty. And Joseph does not just interpret, he presents the plan. Store a fifth of all production in the good years, organize granaries throughout Egypt, centralize distribution. Pharaoh looks at this 30-year-old prisoner and says, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" And in a single day, Joseph goes from prisoner to governor of Egypt, royal ring on his finger, gold chain around his neck, second only to Pharaoh. 13 years separated the pit from the promotion. 13 years that, seen from below, looked like abandonment, but seen from above were preparation. The famine arrives, exactly as Joseph predicted, and it spreads across all the earth, including Canaan, where 10 hungry brothers travel to Egypt to buy food. They prostrate themselves before the governor without knowing it is the brother they threw into a pit 20 years earlier. Joseph recognizes them immediately, and he does not reveal who he is. He tests them. He wants to see if they have changed. He wants to see if they would do to Benjamin, the youngest brother who stayed with the father, what they did to him. And when Judah, the same Judah who suggested selling Joseph, offers himself as a slave in Benjamin's place, Joseph can no longer take it. He sends all the Egyptians out, and alone with his brothers he cries so loudly that Pharaoh's house hears it. "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" The brothers are terrified. They expect revenge. And Joseph says something that summarizes the entire theology of divine providence. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." The brothers' wickedness did not cancel God's plan. It was absorbed by it. Jacob descends to Egypt with the whole family, 70 people, and God appears to Jacob on the journey and says, "Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again." Remember this promise, because between the descent and the return, there will be 400 years of silence. Genesis ends with Joseph dying at 110 years old in Egypt. His last words are a prophecy. "God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land, the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." And he makes the brothers swear that when that day comes, they will take his bones. Joseph dies with his eyes fixed on a land he will never step on, but which he knows exists. And then, between the last verse of Genesis and the first of Exodus, centuries pass. The Bible covers this interval with a single devastating phrase. Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. Everything Joseph did, everything he saved, was forgotten. And the 70 Hebrews who went down to Egypt multiplied into hundreds of thousands. Exodus 1:7 says they became so numerous that the land was filled with them. Pharaoh panics, a foreign people growing within his borders. And the solution is brutal: slavery, forced labor. The Hebrews build the store cities of Pithom and Ramesses with mud bricks and straw under whips under 100-degree sun for generations. And when slavery is not enough to control the growth, Pharaoh decrees the unthinkable. Every Hebrew boy born must be thrown into the Nile. Child genocide. The first recorded attempt in history to exterminate the people God chose. And it is exactly in this scenario of horror that Moses is born. The mother, Jochebed, from the tribe of Levi, hides the baby for 3 months. When she can no longer, she makes a papyrus basket, coats it with tar and pitch, places her son inside, and puts it among the reeds on the bank of the Nile. The sister, Miriam, stands at a distance watching. The same river that was an instrument of death becomes an instrument of salvation. Pharaoh's daughter goes down to bathe. She finds the basket. She opens it. The baby cries, and something happens in that cry that crosses all barriers, cultural, political, racial. The Egyptian princess, daughter of the man who ordered the genocide, feels compassion for a Hebrew baby. Miriam appears and suggests a wet nurse. The nurse is Moses' own mother. The woman who put her son in the river to save him is now paid by the palace to breastfeed him. The irony is almost unbearable. The Pharaoh who ordered all Hebrew babies killed is financing the upbringing of the man who will destroy his empire. Moses grows up in the palace. Acts 7:22 says he was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. He had access to everything: military education, libraries, political power. But at 40 years old, he goes out to see the suffering of his people. He finds an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, looks this way and that, the text makes a point of recording this, and kills the Egyptian. He buries the body in the sand. Moses tried to be the deliverer of his people using his own strength, his own method, his own timing, and he failed. The next day, 2 Hebrews are fighting each other, and when Moses intervenes, one of them responds, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" The news spread. Pharaoh wants to kill him, and Moses flees. The prince of Egypt becomes a shepherd in Midian, in the desert, and there he stays 40 years, 40 years, from prince to shepherd, from golden palaces to leather tents, from commanding armies to guiding flocks. And in the silence of that desert, God was emptying Moses of everything Egypt put in him, so he could fill him with something completely different. At 80 years old, an age when any mission seems absurd, Moses is shepherding sheep on Mount Horeb when he sees something impossible, a bush that is on fire but does not burn up. He approaches, and from the middle of the fire, a voice, "Moses, Moses, take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." It is the first time since Abraham that God reveals himself with this intensity to a human being. And the order is direct. "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out. I am concerned about their suffering. I have come down to rescue them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people out of Egypt." Moses, the man who 40 years earlier acted impulsively to free his people, now shrinks back. He gives 5 excuses. "Who am I? What is your name? What if they do not believe me? I am not eloquent. Please send someone else." Each excuse is answered by God. And when Moses asks for God's name, the response is the theological foundation of the entire Bible. I am who I am. In Hebrew, YHWH, Yahweh. A name the Jews consider so sacred that they do not pronounce it. Not I was or I will be. I am, eternal present, without beginning, without end, pure existence. This is the God who is sending an 80-year-old shepherd to face the most powerful empire on earth. Moses returns to Egypt with his brother Aaron. He goes before Pharaoh and says, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, let my people go." Pharaoh responds with contempt, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." And he increases the weight of slavery. Bricks without straw. Same quota. More suffering. Pharaoh's question, "Who is the Lord?" is going to be answered. not with words, with 10 plagues that will dismantle Egypt piece by piece. And each plague is not random. Each one directly attacks an Egyptian god. The Nile turns to blood, and Hapi, the god of the Nile, is humiliated. Frogs cover the land, and Heket, the goddess with a frog's head, becomes repulsive. Darkness covers Egypt for 3 days, and Ra, the sun god, the supreme deity of the pantheon, is silenced. God was not just freeing Israel, he was judging the entire belief system of Egypt, proving that every idol they worshipped was powerless before the I Am. 9 plagues fall. Pharaoh hardens his heart 9 times, and then God announces the 10th, the one that will change the calendar, the theology, and the history of humanity forever. The 10th plague, the death of every firstborn in Egypt, from the son of Pharaoh on the throne to the son of the prisoner in the dungeon. But for Israel, there is a way to escape. Each family must take a lamb without defect, without blemish, a year-old male. They must keep it for 4 days, long enough for the children to become attached to the animal, so that the sacrifice has weight. Then, at twilight on the 14th day of the month of Nisan, they must kill it, and with the blood, mark the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the door of the house. When the angel of death passes, he will see the blood and pass over. Pesach, Passover, I passed over. It was not the goodness of the family that saved them. It was not the faith of the family that protected them. It was the blood on the doorframe. The most pious family in Egypt, without the blood, would lose their firstborn. The most flawed family in Israel, with the blood on the door, would be spared. Salvation did not depend on merit. It depended on obedience. A lamb died so that the son might live. And 1,500 years later, when John the Baptist sees Jesus walking along the banks of the Jordan, the first words out of his mouth are, "Behold, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world." Not a lamb, the Lamb, the one toward whom all the others had been pointing since Eden. At midnight, the angel passes. A cry goes through Egypt. Exodus 12:30 says, "There was not a house without someone dead." Pharaoh, who resisted 9 plagues, who hardened his heart before blood, frogs, locusts, and darkness, finally breaks. He calls Moses and Aaron while it is still night and says, "Up, leave my people. Go, worship the Lord. Take your flocks, and also bless me." The last phrase is striking. The man who asked, "Who is the Lord?" now asks for the blessing of this same God. 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children, possibly 2 million people, leave Egypt in a single night. And they take with them the bones of Joseph, exactly as he asked 180 years earlier. The promise made to the man who died looking at a land he never stepped on is finally fulfilled. The dead are remembered. Promises are honored. God's time is not man's time, but he does not forget. But Pharaoh repents. He gathers 600 elite chariots and all the cavalry of Egypt and pursues Israel. The people are trapped, mountains on the sides, the Red Sea in front, the most powerful army in the world behind. And they do what any human being would do. They panic. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? The sarcasm of despair. And Moses responds with one of the boldest phrases ever uttered by a human being who had no idea how God would solve the situation. "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." God tells Moses to stretch out his staff over the sea. An east wind blows all night. The waters divide. The bottom of the sea becomes dry land. And 2 million people cross between walls of water at night, with the pillar of fire lighting the way and the column of cloud blocking the view of the Egyptians behind them. The Egyptians follow them in. And when the last Israelite steps onto the other shore, the waters return. Chariots, horses, horsemen, Pharaoh's entire army is swallowed by the sea. That morning, Israel looked back and saw Egyptian bodies on the shore. The people who enslaved them for 400 years lay dead in the sand, and Miriam, the same girl who watched Moses' basket in the Nile, now a grown woman, takes a tambourine and leads the entire nation in song. The first hymn of praise recorded in the Bible is born there, with feet still wet from salt water. But freedom from Egypt was only the beginning, because taking Israel out of Egypt took one night. Taking Egypt out of Israel would take 40 years. 3 days after crossing the sea, the people are already complaining. The water at Marah is bitter. They complain. God sweetens the water. Manna falls from the sky every morning, miraculous bread that feeds 2 million people in the desert for 40 years. Quail arrive in flocks to provide meat. Water gushes from a rock when Moses strikes it. Every need is met in a supernatural way. And yet, at every new difficulty, the people react the same. Why did you bring us out of Egypt? The memory of slavery becomes nostalgia. The onions and watermelons of Egypt become more attractive than freedom with discomfort. It is the same choice of Eden repackaged, the comfort of what is known versus trust in what God promised. 50 days after the Passover, Israel arrives at Mount Sinai, and what happens there is so monumental that the nations of the world will never be the same again. God descends upon the mountain, thunders, lightnings, a thick cloud, the sound of a trumpet that increases more and more. The entire mountain trembles, smoke rises like from a furnace, and God speaks, not through an angel, not through dream. God's voice echoes over the desert for 2 million people to hear simultaneously. And the first words are not a commandment, they are an introduction. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Before saying what the people must do, God reminds them of what he has already done. Obedience is not the condition for the relationship, it is the response to the liberation that has already happened. Then come the 10 Commandments. 10 sentences that became the moral basis of all Western civilization. You shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not covet. But the first 4 do not deal with ethics between humans. They deal with the relationship with God. You shall have no other gods. You shall not make idols. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord. Remember the Sabbath. The message is clear. Horizontal morality only works when it is anchored in verticality. Without God at the center, commandments become suggestions. Moses goes up the mountain to receive the stone tablets written by the very finger of God. He stays 40 days. And while he is at the top of the mountain, in the presence of the creator of the universe, the people below lose patience. 40 days. That was how long it took Israel to break the first commandment. They go to Aaron and say, "Make us gods who will go before us." As for this fellow Moses, we don't know what has happened to him. Aaron, the high priest designated by God, collects the gold earrings, melts them, and carves a golden calf. The people sit down to eat and drink and get up to indulge in revelry, orgies around an idol. At the foot of the same mountain that was still trembling with the presence of God, when Moses comes down and sees the scene, he breaks the tablets of the law. The image is powerful. God's law shatters on the ground at the exact moment the people violate it. And God says to Moses, "Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation." It is a test, and Moses passes. He intercedes. He does not defend the people on merit. The people had no merit. He defends them by appealing to God's character, to the promises he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. The tabernacle is built, a portable tent that functions as God's dwelling in the midst of the people. Every detail is specified by God. Every measurement, every fabric, every piece of furniture has meaning. the Ark of the Covenant at the center, covered by two golden cherubim in the place called the Most Holy Place, separated from the rest by a thick veil. Only the high priest could enter there once a year on the Day of Atonement with sacrificial blood. Without the blood, no one approached. The message was brutal in its clarity. God wants to dwell in the midst of his people, but sin creates a barrier that only blood can cross. And that veil, remember it. Because centuries later, at a specific moment on a Friday afternoon, it will tear from top to bottom, and the way into God's presence will open forever. But between the tabernacle in the desert and the torn veil at Golgotha, Israel still has a long journey ahead, a journey that includes 40 years of desert, the conquest of a promised land, kings who go from glory to ruin, prophets who will speak to the wind, and an exile that will seem like the end of everything. This journey continues now. Israel is an 11-day march from the promised land. 11 days. Moses sends 12 spies to scout Canaan. They spend 40 days traveling through the land. They return carrying a cluster of grapes so large the two men must carry it on a pole. The land is everything God promised, fertile, abundant, flowing with milk and honey. But 10 of the 12 spies say, "We cannot attack those people. They are stronger than we are. The cities are fortified. We saw giants there, the descendants of Anak, and we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes." Only 2, Joshua and Caleb, disagree. Caleb says, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." But the people listen to the majority, and that night 2 million people weep. They want to return to Egypt. They want to elect another leader. They want to stone Joshua and Caleb. And God pronounces the sentence, "This generation will not enter the land." For every day the spies spent in Canaan, 1 year in the desert. 40 days, 40 years. All adults over 20 years old will die in the desert except Joshua and Caleb. 11 days of travel turned into 40 years of a funeral. An entire generation had to die so that the next could inherit the promise. And Moses, the man who faced Pharaoh, who opened the sea, who went up the mountain into the presence of God, he also does not enter. In Numbers 20, when the people complain of thirst in Kadesh, God tells Moses to speak to the rock. Moses, furious, strikes the rock twice. Water gushes out. The people drink. But God says, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." One action, one moment of anger, and a life's dream falls apart. Moses climbs Mount Nebo, looks at Canaan on the other side of the Jordan. He sees the palm trees Jericho, the hills of Judea, the fertile Jordan Valley, and he dies there. God buries him personally. No one knows where the grave is to this day. The deliverer of Israel sees the promise, but he does not touch it, and the baton passes to Joshua. Joshua leads the people across the Jordan, the waters part, echoing the Red Sea. The first city is Jericho. Thick walls, reinforced gates, a fortress that should have been impregnable. God's military strategy, march around it, 7 days, 7 priests with 7 trumpets of ram's horns. On the 7th day, 7 laps. And when the trumpets sound and the people shout, the walls collapse. Archaeologists have found the remains of Jericho with walls fallen outward. Not inward, as in normal invasions, but outward, as if knocked down by an internal force. The conquest takes years. It is not clean. It is not easy. But the land is conquered, divided among the 12 tribes, and the promise made to Abraham 500 years earlier is fulfilled. His descendants possess the land of Canaan. Joshua dies, and without a centralized leader, Israel enters the most chaotic period of its history. The Judges, 300 years of a cycle that repeats with nauseating precision. The people abandon God. God allows enemies to oppress them. The people cry out. God raises up a judge, a charismatic military leader who frees them. The people serve God, or the judge lives. The judge dies. The people abandon God again, and the cycle restarts, each turn more degraded than the last. Gideon, Deborah, Samson, deeply flawed heroes used by a God who works with the material he has. The last verse of Judges summarizes it all. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. Israel wanted a king, not because it was wise, but because they wanted to be like the other nations. And God, with sadness, grunts it. Samuel, the last judge, the first great prophet since Moses, anoints Saul as the first king of Israel. Saul has everything: appearance, height, charisma. But he lacks the essential. He disobeys God repeatedly. He offers sacrifices that only the priest should offer. He spares the Amalekite king when God ordered total destruction. And Samuel confronts him. Saul does not repent. He justifies himself. I did obey, he insists, while the sound of sheep taken as spoil bleats behind him. Samuel pronounces the sentence, "The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to one of your neighbors, to one better than you." And God sends Samuel to Bethlehem, to the house of a man named Jesse, to anoint the next king. Jesse presents 7 sons, tall, strong, impressive. God rejects them all. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. There is one more son, the youngest, ruddy, a shepherd, forgotten in the field, David, the boy who killed lions and bears to protect his father's flock. Samuel pours the oil over his head, and the Spirit of God comes upon him from that day on. David faces Goliath, the Philistine giant nearly 9 feet tall, with a sling and 5 stones. But the victory is not in the aim. It is in the phrase David shouts before running toward the giant. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." 1 stone, 1 fall, and the course of Israel changes forever. David becomes king. He conquers Jerusalem. He transforms a Jebusite city into an eternal capital. He brings the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, dancing before it with such intensity that his own wife feels ashamed. And God makes David a promise that echoes until the last chapter of Revelation. "Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever, forever." No other king of any nation received such a promise. David's throne is eternal, and when an angel appears to a young virgin in Nazareth centuries later, the words are, "The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever." But David, the man after God's own heart, falls. On a spring afternoon from the palace rooftop, he sees Bathsheba bathing. Adultery, pregnancy, and to cover it up, he sends her husband, Uriah, one of his most loyal soldiers, to the front lines with orders to retreat and leave him to die. Murder by proxy. The shepherd who faced a giant for the honor of God now kills an innocent man to hide his sin. The prophet Nathan confronts him with a parable. And when David condemns the man in the story, without realizing it is himself, Nathan pronounces, "You are the man." David breaks. Psalm 51 is born from this breaking, the rawest prayer of repentance ever recorded. "Create in me a pure heart, O God." God forgives David, but the consequences do not disappear. The child dies. The sword never departs from David's house. Absalom, his own son, rebels and tries to take the throne. Solomon, son of David and Bathsheba, inherits the kingdom. When God offers him anything, Solomon asks for wisdom, and he receives it, along with wealth, power, and fame that attracted kings and queens from all over the world. The Queen of Sheba travels thousands of miles to test his wisdom, and leaves saying, "Not even half was told me." Solomon builds the temple in Jerusalem, David's dream realized by his son. 7 years of construction. Stones cut in silence at the quarries so that no hammer sounded at the sacred site. Gold lining the inner walls. the Ark of the Covenant installed in the most holy place. When the glory of God descends upon the temple, it is so intense that the priests cannot stand to minister. But Solomon, the wisest of men, commits the most foolish of mistakes. 700 wives, 300 concubines, many of them foreigners who bring their gods, and Solomon's heart turns away. The man who built God's temple now builds altars for Moloch and Ashtoreth on the hills around Jerusalem. Wisdom without obedience is just wasted intelligence. Solomon dies. His son Rehoboam refuses the advice of the elders, increases taxes, and the kingdom splits in two. Israel in the north, 10 tribes, and Judah in the south, 2 tribes. The north has 20 kings over 2 centuries, all bad, no exceptions. Jeroboam sets up golden calves in Dan and Bethel, so the people do not go down to Jerusalem to worship. The same idol of Sinai, repeated. In 722 BC, Assyria invades the north. The 10 tribes are deported and scattered among the nations. They never return. They disappear from history. The south lasts another 136 years. Some good kings, Hezekiah, Josiah, try reforms, but the decline is irreversible. Prophet after prophet is sent. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Amos, Hosea, all with the same message: repent or judgment comes. The people do not listen. Jeremiah weeps. That is why he is called the weeping prophet. He preaches for 40 years, and no one converts. But in the midst of the denunciations, the prophets plant seeds of a hope that will germinate centuries later. Isaiah 53 describes a suffering servant, pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities, with such surgical precision that it looks like an eyewitness account, written 700 years before it happened. In 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar destroys Jerusalem. Solomon's temple, the glory of Israel, is reduced to ashes. The Ark of the Covenant disappears. No one knows to this day where it is. The people are taken captive to Babylon. Psalm 137 captures the pain. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. There on poplars we hung our harps, but even in exile God does not abandon them. Daniel is thrown into the lion's den and comes out without a scratch. His 3 friends are thrown into the fiery furnace, and a 4th man walks with them in the midst of the flames. 70 years later, exactly as Jeremiah prophesied, the people return. Ezra, Nehemiah. The temple is rebuilt. Smaller, simpler. The old men who remembered the first temple weep when they see the difference. But it is a new beginning. And then silence. The Old Testament ends with Malachi. And God remains silent for 400 years. No prophet, no vision, no voice from heaven. 4 centuries of darkness. Until, on an ordinary night, in an insignificant town called Bethlehem, a teenager named Mary gives birth to a son in a manger. No palace, no army, no fanfare. The God who thundered at Sinai, who parted the sea, who made the sun stand still, enters the world as a newborn who needs to be nursed. The Word that created the universe now cries in the lap of a young virgin. Emmanuel, God with us. Not God above, not God distant, God with us. Jesus grows up in Nazareth. He works as a carpenter for 30 years, and then he begins his ministry. 3 years that divided history into before and after. He goes up on a mountain and teaches, "Love your enemies, bless those who persecute you. The greatest among you will be the servant of all." Words that inverted everything the world knew. He heals the blind, raises the dead, calms storms, forgives sinners, touches lepers whom no one would touch, dines with tax collectors whom everyone despised. He chooses 12 ordinary men, fishermen, tax collectors, zealots, and transforms this unlikely group into the foundations of a movement that no empire could destroy. Every miracle is a declaration. The kingdom of God has arrived. Every parable is an invitation. There is still time to enter. But the religious leaders of Israel, The ones who should have recognized him first are the ones who reject him the most. He threatens their system, their power, their control. And on the night of Passover, the same feast that commemorated the liberation from Egypt, Jesus breaks bread and says, "This is my body given for you." He takes the cup. "This is the new covenant in my blood, a new covenant, no longer the blood of lambs and goats. The final lamb is about to be sacrificed." That same night, Judas betrays him with a kiss. Jesus is arrested, tried in 6 illegal courts, scourged with a Roman flagrum that tears flesh from bone, crowned with thorns, and forced to carry his own cross to Golgotha, the place of the skull. At 9 in the morning, nails pierce his hands and feet, and he who said, "I am," the same name God revealed to Moses at the burning bush, hangs between heaven and earth. At noon, darkness hovers the land for 3 hours. And then Jesus cries out, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani." My God, why have you forsaken me?" It is the citation of Psalm 22, written 1,000 years earlier by David, which describes the crucifixion with details that would only be invented centuries later: hands and feet pierced, bones out of joint, lost caste for his clothes. On the cross, everything converges. The Lamb of Eden, the Ram of Abraham, the Lamb of the Passover, the daily sacrifice of the tabernacle, all pointed to this moment. And when Jesus says it's finished and gives up his spirit, the veil of the temple, that thick veil that separated the most holy place, that prevented humanity from approaching God, tears from top to bottom, as if heaven itself had torn it. God opening the barrier, God opening the way. The access that was closed in Eden is now open forever. Joseph of Arimathea places the body in a new tomb carved into the rock. A stone weighing about a ton is rolled across the entrance. Roman soldiers stand guard. An imperial seal locks the tomb. And for 3 days, it seems that everything is over. The disciples are hiding, afraid, defeated. Everything they followed for 3 years seems to have been in vain. But on Sunday morning, women go to the tomb to anoint the body, and they find the stone rolled away, the tomb empty, and an angel who speaks the most revolutionary words ever uttered in human history. "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He has risen." The resurrection is not an epilogue. It is the central point. Without it, as Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 15, the Christian faith is useless, and Christians are the most miserable of all men. But if it happened, and more than 500 witnesses saw the risen Christ at the same time, then everything changes. Death is not the end. The tomb is not the final point. The story that began in a garden with a forbidden tree ends with an empty tomb and an open invitation. Jesus appears to the disciples for 40 days. He eats with them. He walks with them. He shows them the nail marks. And then, on the Mount of Olives, he ascends to heaven before their eyes. 2 angels appear and say, "This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven." 10 days later, at Pentecost, the Holy Spirit descends upon 120 disciples gathered in an upper room in Jerusalem. Tons of fire, a rushing wind, and Galilean fishermen without formal education begin to preach with power that shakes empires. Peter, the same one who denied Jesus 3 times around a fire, stands up and preaches, and 3,000 people are converted in a single day. The gospel spreads like fire, from Jerusalem to Samaria, from Samaria to Antioch, from Antioch to the world. Paul, a Pharisee who persecuted Christians to the death, meets the risen Christ on a road to Damascus and becomes the greatest missionary in history. He writes 13 letters that make up almost half of the New Testament. He plants churches on 4 ancient continents, and he is beheaded in Rome for refusing to deny what he saw. This is the story of the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, from the garden to the celestial city. The last book, written by John, exiled on an island called Patmos, reveals the outcome. Christ returns. The serpent that deceived Eve is thrown into the lake of fire, and a city descends from heaven, the New Jerusalem, without death, without tears, without pain. The tree of life that was barred in Eden reappears in the center of the city, and this time no one is expelled. I am making everything new, declares the one who is seated on the throne. From a couple in a paradise to an innumerable multitude from every nation, tribe, and tongue before the throne of the Lamb. And the thread that sews it all together, every chapter, every character, every tragedy, and every triumph, is a promise made back in Eden. The seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. Abraham believed it without understanding. Moses pointed to it without seeing. David sang about it without reaching it. The prophets announced it from afar. And in a manger in Bethlehem, it became flesh. The Bible is not a collection of moral rules. It is not a self-help manual. It is the story of a God who did everything to be with the people who did everything to run away from him. And the question it asks, from the first to the last verse, is not, did you understand everything? It is the same one that echoed among the trees of Eden when Adam hid. Where are you? That question is still in the air now. And if this video did something inside of you, click on the next one appearing on your screen. It was made for those who made it this far.